Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Fanalysis, Star Wars. I'm Ready For. This is Grey Jedi 91.
Hello.
This is Evan Never 95.
Hello.
And this is Jenserai 1.
Brave disabled man fights 10 terrorists at once.
Try to guess what he's referencing there. So, this is the second arc of Star Wars Republic, that line of comics. The first ongoing line of comic. This is the second arc entitled Vow of Justice. Came out in March of 1999. So, Phantom Menace came out in May of 99, I want to say. So this predates the release of the Phantom Menace, just like Prelude to Rebellion, which is weird because we actually couldn't figure out where this was. Like, was it the first arc? Was it the second? Was it the third when we were going back through this? Because it's actually printed in the original issues. It takes up like the last 5 pages of the last 3 issues that make up the first arc, Prelude to Rebellion. So it's 3 issues, but it all adds up to only like 15 pages. So we're covering it now basically for the completionist trophy. We're just getting it done because we want to do everything, but no one really cares that much about this. Evan, take it away. What are we talking about here? What's the point of this issue?
Well, the main point of this story arc is to whereas the previous one talked about Ki-Adi's, current Jedi life, this one is essentially his origin story, how he got recruited into the Order. It dives in a little bit about his training under Master Yoda and his relationship to Anya Kuro.
And that's the most
Although
interesting
she's
part
not
of that
named,
for me,
right?
actually. Yeah,
right.
She's
not named, but
Jedi.
this is her canonic, chronologically speaking, it's her first appearance.
It also provides some more insight into Syrian culture.
Mm-hmm. Yes, kind of a bit more of a focused look at his family specifically, right, rather than obviously we saw his own family later on in the previous issues.
The family that he came from.
Yeah, precisely, the one that raised him. This is kind of a focus on that kind of microcosm rather than the culture overall, which is nice. The most interesting part for me though is actually I guess retroactively, because at the time she wasn't really anything, but just the connection to the Dark Woman to this moment, Anya Kuro. It's nice to have that kind of that look back and see another Jedi she interacted with, because she's a personal favorite of mine. I also like Ki-Adi's own personal kind of it's not strictly his motivation for becoming a Jedi, because as ever that comes when you actually join the temple and you start to learn what it really means to be one and why you should care. But the initial kind of push from his own family
it's stemming
direction.
From a positive place and a desire to do good in the galaxy, not just for himself but for his family.
And we get the sense that he's had that that was something that he felt as well. It wasn't just pushed on him by his dad. Go, we need you to become a Jedi. It wasn't like that was certainly a part of like the equation, but it wasn't something that was supposed to be focusing on why he became a Jedi. It wasn't the onus was still on him as a character, which I like.
Mm-hmm. He takes responsibility.
Even at such a young age, which it's another reason why I can buy Anya's support of him as a upcoming Jedi, because she even later on in the next arc we'll discuss for the following comics, she expresses approval for him, and saying he's done a good job and he's going places and has done already as a Jedi. So it's nice to see that this was the spark she kind of caught on to. It wasn't just that forced sensitivity that she was latching to or looking towards.
It also kind of sets up his standing as having been recruited into the Order at a slightly later age than others of his era.
Yes,
which is sort of a common story at this point in the publication history. Yeah, because they hadn't really gotten into the nitty gritty of what the Jedi are on screen yet. Like we said, this predates the actual prequel films.
The definition of the prequels kind of offered for how the galaxy was supposed to work, specifically for this era, hadn't really been set yet. So they were kind of like, okay, let's kind of play with this, and then maybe retroactively in the creative side, they would kind of let they were cottoned on to what they needed to do, and they kind of fixed it.
I would say,
well, even in the next arc. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I would say that's probably something that if you're like a film purist, which I don't know why you would read this anyway, but I mean, if you were like a film purist and felt like the movie canon and should just be all that you care about, it probably will grate on your nerves a little bit, because over the course of the Phantom Menace and these next 2 arcs, we'll be introduced to Anakin, who's fine. He's supposed to be the exception. Mm-hmm. But then you have Eve Koth, Ashrad Het, Sharad Het, both have the same story of being accepted later, and Ki. So that's 5. So
basically every single new character they're introducing as well. So it's you've set the wrong precedent.
What's going on in the council chamber? You're gonna
bending the rules quite a bit. Yeah.
Mhm.
The other thing I do like about this storyline, though, is because it makes a point that actually kind of feeds into the other examples you were just talking about how some people actually end up turning their children over to the Jedi Order to get the Jedi Order out of get the kid out of the bad situation that is their home life. In Ki-Adi's case, because the Syrian male birth rate is so low, it's like there's a very real chance that he might be abducted from his family by raiders so that the raider chief then can raise him as a son because he can't bear any of his own. So his father handed him over to the Jedi so he didn't have to worry about that. It wasn't just about Ki-Adi becoming a Jedi and then coming back and dealing with the raiders. It was get Ki-Adi away from the raiders so he's no longer in danger of being kidnapped.
Yeah, you got that
There's
kind
a
of twin
practical
motivation
purpose
from the
behind it.
father. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was kind of, yes, we need you in the future. We need our own Jedi to protect the family, but also, yeah, take him away, keep him safe. Which was highlighted mostly by the fact that he hid him under the floorboards. It was he clearly cares about his son, but for whatever reason it comes from, be it family pride, the necessity of the survival of the male heir, or just his own personal love. So I like how it doesn't focus on any of these traits. It just kind of lets it sit and kind of breathe around the idea of the focus, which is Ki-Adi's own personal upbringing.
Well, even that connection of going to the Order for a better life is actually something that those 5 characters that Matt just mentioned actually somewhat share to a certain degree.
Yes, yeah, and the different. We'll get more into it in the next
With
comic, but the
Sharad
kind of different flavors of it.
Sharad being a slight exception.
Yeah,
He's a slight exception. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we get the Ki-Adi kind of being taken away by Anya and being raised in the Order and returning for his first mission. Actually, his first mission as a knight to his
To
homeworld.
confront the chieftain that tried to abduct him.
Yes,
In the first
or
place.
attempt to anyway.
This guy, yeah,
Bin Gardazan.
yep, because Syrian naming conventions.
Right.
He basically returned. He goes to the camp where the raiders are still operating, or supposedly still operating the same way they were previously, and challenges the chieftain, who, unbeknownst to him, is no longer Bin Gardazan. Is she named the female chieftain?
No, she is not, which I actually find to be surprisingly appropriate. It's like the one named villain that Ki-Adi-Mundi dedicated his life to taking down, Bin Gardazan, ultimately becomes this insignificant, withered old man that the tribe treats like shit, and his successor isn't even identified. Which says that she's basically heading down the same path and is ultimately equally inconsequential. Who the fuck cares what her name is? She's just another raider.
Yeah, I like the kind of
the
narrative
story does
nod in
kind
that
of
way.
try and keep the story centered. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. No, you're right. It's both. It's the centralizing the kind of flow of the story. It's not about her. It's about Ki-Adi and Ben Garda. So that makes sense. But also, kind of the narrative nod of like you said, Connor. She is also inconsequential. So she's going to be going down that same path, most likely anyway. I like the kind of focus on that.
So he challenges her to a fight, but he was so shocked by her presence and what happened to Bin Gardazan. Add that to he got his hands tied behind his back and he ends up losing.
Still a young knight. This doesn't make any sense if he was a master obviously. And the actual
which he
comic,
even says.
Yeah, the actual comic makes nods, gives a nod to that, which I like and appreciate. But yeah, at his current stage, this is something that he's going to very, very realistically run into. The lack of concentration, the emotional stakes involved. Because again, this is kind of even the first time we saw Ki-Adi in the comic form, Yoda makes nods to his, the fact that he could keep calm in this situation and keep focused on what he needed to do. These kind of stories are all, from the council's kind of looking at the mission perspective, all very similar in that regard. Ki-Adi either did or needs to do what he needs to do to complete the mission. That's why he's either being sent or why he's being recommended from having been sent.
It also kind of further highlights the notion that, even the greatest of Jedi Masters all had that first mission that didn't go smoothly.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that it also makes a point about how Ki-Adi-Mundi basically spent his entire apprenticeship training specifically to take down Bin Gardazan, only to find out that all of that effort put into that goal was wasted because Bin Gardazan was no longer a threat and didn't matter anymore, which kind of makes a point about how the whole idea of spending like decades training specifically to take your vengeance is ultimately a waste of time because, well, for all you know, that same guy will get taken down by someone else and he'll never even know about you.
It's a story
Things just happen.
Yeah, it's a story that's been done many times. I mean, I can think of one off the top of my head in regards to Avatar and the Southern Raider. It's something that's, and obviously that came much later, I know. But there are different ways and different approaches you can take to it, and I like that this one very much focused on Ki-Adi. It wasn't about the villain. It was about, which these kind of stories so often are, I guess. It was about, you know, his approach and his mindset towards him. Focus on justice, not revenge. You know, focus on the act, not the person. That's a very effective kind of undertone for this story, because again, it's very short. We're bigging this up to be like the kind of a rather significant mission, but it's not in his life, and certainly not in the comic. But yeah,
I mean, but as soon as he's able to regain his headspace, he quickly escapes and defeats the chieftain easily.
And it comes down to that final point where then, he does make Bengala, who doesn't stick with the camp and just and dissolve like the rest of them. He tries to go in for that final knife toss, and he's just inconsequential. That's kind of the final beat of the series of the issue.
Yeah,
it's also a nice little bit of explanation for who Ki-Adi is. Ties in well with the other story that's being written by the same author, Jan Sternad, however you say that name. Prelude to Rebellion. The artwork is decent. You know, like it's not my favorite style, but it gets the point across, and I like the coloring a lot. It's a decent little thing, but it's just not very. And I wouldn't recommend it to anybody unless they're a big fan of Ki-Adi for some reason, and
you want to know his origins.
Yeah.
Even less so than the previous art we mentioned, because we said the same thing about that one. You know, you don't need to look at this unless you care about Ki-Adi specifically. But yeah, it's a very well done piece, but it's just a small, very localized story about a character that at this point hadn't really been given any definition. So that's all it was really focusing on.
It doesn't do anything wrong, but at the same time, it doesn't do anything groundbreaking. So as it is, it just stands as what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of it. That's Valve Justice, guys. So there's that. We're going to take a brief, what do you call it?
2-minute interlude.
Not hiatus. What's the word?
Intermission?
Yeah. Intermission, like to gather our thoughts for like the next arc, Outlander. So we'll be back in a second.
And we're back, jumping straight back into Outlander, the third arc of the Republic comic series.
Also a massive time jump. We're back to Ki-Adi at his proper age, and this takes place literally weeks, if not days, after Phantom Menace in the timeline.
Yes. Now, so that would be 32 BBY? 33 BBY?
32 BBY.
Okay.
My copy of Emissaries and Assassins has the date as approximately 32 years before the Battle of Yavin. So, 32.
A very, very, very eventful year, to say the least.
Yeah,
anyone who's seen Phantom Menace knows.
In the real world as well, because this was 1999.
Yes, that explosion that changed everything.
But so this is a loose continuation of what we've been talking about with the previous story arcs. Not so much Val, because that took place. Val of Justice took place in the past, as we've said, but continuing off Prelude to Rebellion, right? Yeah. It's clear, as we talked about in that past discussion. Oh, you weren't there for that, Connor. Sorry, I forgot.
No, I'm sorry.
So at the time, it was very clearly like they were given this character, Ki-Adi, who everyone knew was going to be in the Phantom Menace. Was like, okay, make a story out of this. And it seemed like at Dark Horse, whoever was in charge of determining what stories to tell or like approving stories, the original intent apparently was to make Ki-Adi sort of the star of this series. That very quickly becomes not the case. In fact, in this arc, it's kind of already not the case. He's sort of the vehicle through which we view this story. I wouldn't call him the main character though. After he meets, the Hets, but we'll get into that. But again, so this is June 1999 when this is released. The writer now is Tim Truman, not Jan Sternad anymore. And we're dealing with this is the first arc to come out, I suppose, after the release of the Phantom Menace. So it's appropriate that it takes place just after the Phantom Menace, both sort of like in universe and out of universe, if you get what I'm saying. But what I want to talk about before we get into the actual events of this story is, when did we all read this in our lives, or like in terms of our fandoms, like when did we come to this story?
Well, for me,
yeah.
For me, it's like I truly started becoming a dedicated Star Wars fan, like basically in 2005 when, in the hype surrounding Revenge of the Sith, because that's the year when I was first introduced to like the Star Wars Republic series through the Clone Wars volumes. Clone Wars Volume 4 was the very first thing I read, and is pretty much the reason why I'm a Star Wars fan. And this storyline, I ended up flipping through it at the library after I read Clone Wars Volume 4, and I was just looking for other Star Wars trade paperbacks and comics, and it's like, that's where I read this. I read Dark Empire there, you know. So for me, it was just like, I remember reading this back in high school, just flipping through it at the public library. I never actually took it out because I found out stuff I was more interested in, but I do remember in finding this one quite interesting, and I'm quite glad I own it now, even if it's just in omnibus format.
When you say this, is that what you're talking about? The omnibus or trade paperback or the issues? What do you mean?
The trade paperback. I read the trade I read the trade paperback at the public library because the public library across the street from my high school actually was very well stocked for Star Wars comics. I was impressed.
Okay.
Yeah, mine was similar. Obviously, mine came at a slightly later date because of my age. Mine was also kind of motivated by a chain because at that point, when I read Clone Wars Volume 3, which is the first time Asherad Het gets introduced in that time frame, I was very curious about his character being a Tusken Jedi and all that. Mm-hmm. And I believe I actually used Wikipedia to look up his character, and I found his first appearance being in the Outlander comic, so I had the name, and I also went to my local bookstore, which also had a very great supply, and I found the Outlander trade paperback, and I read it and fell in love with it.
Okay. Kellen?
For me, I missed the majority of the comics that come through on this particular trade, the omnibus. Is it?
You didn't really start getting into those until you met us, really, in a lot of ways.
Well, no, not for all of them. The Emissaries to Malaster run, that I'd read that one, for example, but that was one specific
That's
issue.
probably why you didn't.
Wow, what an intro.
And that was way back. That wasn't one by any means my first entry into Star Wars, but it was my first into this pocket of issues. So I missed a bunch of them and didn't get all of these stories filled in for me until like 2009 when I jumped on with the omnibus run, somewhere around that. I think it may have been earlier or later because I don't know when those came out. But whenever they did, I got all of the omnibuses in a row and kind of jumped. That was my jumping point, and it managed to fill in all the gaps that I had otherwise missed in the actual original comic runs and the trade paperbacks and such. But so this one was much later for me.
Okay. Approximate age, do you think, that when you read this?
2009. I was in year 9, so whenever you are 15.
Wait, 2009. Okay. Yeah, okay. So, yeah. So, it's interesting to me because none of us here will have this perspective, and I'm curious if there was ever anyone who read this when it came out, like 20 fucking years ago almost, right? Who was excited by it at the time. Because, like, looking back on it, it's like I'm much the same as Connor. In that I started collecting, I dipped my toes into the EU before this, but I didn't really grab it and run like sort of headlong, into like the thickets of the EU, until I started collecting the Clone Wars, which is really the same series. It's a Republic, but the Clone Wars trade paperback issues. And when I read the Battle of Jabim, and that concludes with Obi-Wan supposedly being thought dead, and Anakin's briefly being instructed by Ki-Adi, which is weird because he almost doesn't come up again until then. You know what I mean? Yeah. After like these next few issues, or arcs rather. But he meets this Tusken Jedi, Asherad Het, and that's where I met Asherad. I had no idea there was like backstory to that. I just thought he was cool, and a lot of that had to do with his personality, but just like the strength of the artwork by that time, because that's Jan Duursema, however you say that name, Duursema. But anyway, the person behind all of like the good Star Wars legacy issues, by the way, in terms of artwork and helping to craft that story. So it was a very big surprise to me when I realized that there were early issues that were about Ki-Adi, and I instantly appreciated this from the first time I read it because I really like that storyline between Asherad and his father, and how it deals with just the state of Tatooine. But I feel like if I'd read this as a kid when it came out, when I was 7 or 8 at the time, I think I probably wouldn't have cared at that time. To me, the strength of this issue, or this arc rather, is much more apparent in post. You know what I mean? Like, and seeing how it connects to all these other storylines and eras. This is the introduction to Darth Krayt. Not that you could have ever known that at the time, for example.
That's another shocker that that really shake things up when it was originally released.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the strengths and weaknesses of particularly the comic runs of the EU. You can, because obviously every comic someone's first, you don't necessarily read them in chronological order, or even as they're released, depending on how you come into it. So you can sometimes think, oh, yeah, this is a cool character, and never know that there are entire runs of them that have them as the main character, whereas here they're just a side character. So that, and the fact that some of these characters are so long-lived in universe that they can come up all the way from the very, very start of this Republic run, like Asherad, and then end up all the way to the Crate era. You can kind of dip your toe in multiple different eras and runs, and unbeknownst to you, encounter the same character a lot of the time. So yeah, it just kind of depends where you jump into it and whether or not you get lucky. I think Wikipedia, as Evan said a minute ago, Wikipedia has a lot to offer on that front. You can kind of look up a character and go, oh, this is where they appeared. It's one of my favorite things about the wiki.
When I was little, I used to spend so much time just scrolling through and just reading bios over and over again.
It's most people's first step into the larger world of the EU. I know that for a fact. Since many of my friends got into it that way. So
yeah, it's like there was a time when I edited quite frequently on Wikipedia. There are like articles on the site that I pretty much wrote. It's like if you read the article on the Dark Acolytes, I pretty much wrote that.
That's not also interesting. I thought you would have cared about, Connor, at all. I thought that you would have passed over Dark Acolytes.
But yeah, lead us into the comic run as it is, Matt. Lead us into Outlander as by itself.
Well, it's basically...
We have quite the intro.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it again sort of is under this presumption that Ki-Adi is going to be like the mainstay of like the series, which doesn't end up being the case. But that's sort of it seems like there was some kind of... The storyline carries very obvious parallels to the storyline of The Phantom Menace. So I feel like they were probably writing this with some understanding of where that story was going. I don't know if they'd actually would have seen the film by then. But it's basically the same story, just told better for me. And that's sort of what I appreciate about it. But it begins with Ki-Adi-Mundi being given a mission to go to Tatooine because, well, it doesn't begin here actually. That's sort of like the framework. We actually open on at like the raid on the gun stand, as I see it in the notes here.
There's a Corellian couple who recently moved to Tatooine, who goes to buy rifles to defend themselves from the Tusken raids, which the story tells us has been ramping up a lot lately.
And this scene serves to establish both the conflict in this part of the setting at the moment, and also introduce the characters that we're going to be introduced to later. The kind of emotional weight behind why we should care about this problem, both in the couple's, or at least in the husband's case, the death. And more importantly, the kind of real focus of this is Sharad Tet, who is at this point just a nameless Tusken leader, and his dealing with her.
Also, I think it's
everything going forward. But
I think it is very minor, but literally the very first page of this comic begins with the Jedi Code being recited. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the first introduction of that in this era. Like obviously, other comics previous to this had it, Tales of the Jedi and all that. But as far as just the Republic era goes, I believe this is the first time it is ever,
I'm
showcased.
sure it's the first time in the comics, because they're really. That's another thing worth noting is that what this isn't Dark Horse's first Star Wars comic line, not by any stretch of the imagination. That goes back to like 1991, 1992, somewhere in there, early 90s.
This is Tales of the Jedi and Dark Empire.
Yeah, this is at the end of the decade, but it's the first ongoing line of comics that, not just like a limited run or a couple of story arcs. This was the ongoing series. So yeah, it probably is going to be the first
introduction to the Jedi Code for a lot of fans. So there's that.
Assuming they read it at the time. Yeah, I would be curious because those people they would all be about 10 years older than us, or me. I'm a little older than. Well, no, I'm not older than you, Connor. You're the old man here. But in any case. But yeah, so we would need that perspective from somebody who's like a decade older for somebody who probably would have read this at the time. I'm curious to talk to
comment down below if you fit the criteria.
Yes, let us know what your introduction to this was, or what age you were rather when you did.
But anyway, back to the Corellian couple.
The question came up as to before we started recording, like why would they move here?
Yeah, I know. I said that. I was like, why on earth would you move to Tatooine from Corellia? Corellia is like a hub in the galaxy. It's one of the kind of good places to live by and large, and you decide, okay, yeah, let's move to the Outer Rim and let's move to Tatooine, this desert planet where they have to have entire farms just to provide moisture for us. Whoever sold them that ticket, really did their job.
It's sort of the history of Tatooine, over and over, is that people come here to, find their fortune, not realizing just how little is here. It had to have been just a case of ignorance, as opposed to this is what we wanted,
And
which is kind of the case, by the way, it reads somewhat.
Yeah. The irony is that it is totally possible to find your fortune on Tatooine. You just got to know where to look. The problem is that it pretty much involves doing some pretty shady shit.
Yeah, you're going to be going to some dark places if you want to succeed on Tatooine.
Yeah, it's like Tatooine
this is the theme of this story, actually, with Aura Singh. Yeah,
it is a local hub. It is a local hub world, but because it's got so little in natural resources, the legitimate government of the galaxy basically doesn't give a shit about this planet, because why? So it's controlled by the Hutts.
And then that makes sense, because its primary benefit to anyone who does seek to control it is access to the hyperspace terminals. It's basically the hub's hub point for all of the Outer Rim, at least in this direction of the galaxy. So that's why they care. It's just a point that they can control the flow of goods. And if those goods are all illegal, why would the government be
the illegal flow of goods as well? Specifically.
So the raid happens, and the Tuskens literally just slaughter everyone. It's a very brutal opening.
And we get the introduction of again, we don't know it's actually Sharad at this point, but just the Tusken leader and a lightsaber wielding one who intervenes in the baby's and the mother's execution and kind of says, nope, we'll let these guys live.
And one little detail I love is that in a lot of the pre-Attack of the Clones comics, before Attack of the Clones itself retconned it and said that Jedi only carried red and green lightsabers, it's like there were blue lightsabers of... Yeah, blue and green,
you said red.
I'm sorry, I was thinking about red because I'm going to come to that, but only carry blue and green lightsabers. And before that, the Star Wars Republic series had the Jedi carrying lightsabers in every hue, like Ki-Adi in this comic has a purple lightsaber. And one reason why I really like that is because it allows them to use a Jedi with a red lightsaber as a potential red herring darksider, because it basically creates a little bit of mystery, because now we're in a setting where we see the red lightsaber and our first thought is darksider. But the more we get into this era and see more Jedi with red lightsabers, like just legit Jedi with red lightsabers, it kind of starts creating a little bit of mystery around that. And to me, it's like the whole idea of restricting the lightsaber colors was one of the reasons why it was a bad thing, is because it took away that little air of mystery and potential confusion.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was actually thinking about this the other day. So this comic came out around the same time as the Power Battlers video game, which, depending on how you look at it, would mean that Sharad may be the first quote-unquote good guy, like in the Republic era, ever to wield a red blade, because Adi Gallia obviously was showcased in the video game as having one, but
and these as well.
And this run as well.
Yeah. But which one came first?
I think
was it
this
the game
did
or this
marginally.
comic?
The game was 2000, and this was 99, I believe, right?
Okay, so in that case,
only just though.
We've had good guys wielding red blades before. Leia actually wielded one in the Thrawn trilogy era, but in terms of the prequel era, Sharad was the first with a red blade then, which is interesting. At least until it got retconned that his blade was always green.
Yeah, and of course, with this being, the Republic era being the thing that kind of got so many people into the Star Wars EU, because obviously the films were coming about and the hype was starting to rebuild again, and this would have been a lot of people's first, introduction. So as Connor said, I like that it introduces the kind of mystique of who this could be, because, and I also like as well, following on what we do know later, that it's attached to Sharad as well, because he's a character that applying that kind of initial impression to it works very effectively, because he's so strikingly not that kind of
a Tusken with a lightsaber in and of itself is very unorthodox.
Well, that point. Sorry, Connor, I'm jumping off your original point. When you mentioned the red herring thing, I think it especially works because of the fact that you guys have mentioned how brutal the opening is, but he has a red lightsaber, and it's like, oh, this guy's bad, but he stops the violence when it goes too far and turns on one of his own, and that is it's a very filmic opening. Like if this was a movie, that would be a strongly thematic scene that would work without dialogue, especially for a character that's not really supposed to speak all that much, even though he can. You know, it's like it works. You're left to wonder, who is this guy, without the movie telling you who is this guy.
I was actually going to talk about exactly that, because that's what also adds to the air of mystique. It's like you see this guy leading a brutal raid, red lightsaber, oh, Darksider, but then he does a profoundly human act and returns a child to its mother and says, "Blessed be your going out from us, woman of Corellia."
In basic, which we've never seen a Tusken do.
I know. It's like the moment of utter confusion, and it's like, that's so great. It's like you finish this and you're like, whoa, what the fuck just happened?
I better keep reading.
It is, as you said, an excellent cinematic opening. You know, this would be an extremely good film opener, not because it's it's action and it sets a nice thematic tone to what we're about to see in the rest of the story, but also it so effectively establishes our initial impressions of the characters, both on existing knowledge from, like I said, the Tusken culture that we're aware of in limited amounts, the red lightsaber aspect, the fact that the character isn't speaking to the last moment, but also just what we know retroactively about him. This is the character that this is the setup for a character that is deeply layered, in his approach to his philosophy on the Force. So having this be that snapshot introduction was very effective.
I like, it's like, although he's curtailing the violence, he's on board with it to a point. If you look, like, the first shot is fired by Asherad, who at this point is like a 15-year-old boy. So he's told his son, he's ordered his son to execute that person there. He is a war leader, but I mean there's a reason to it. There's a method behind the madness, as we find out. But it is a very dark and mysterious, and at the same time, eye-opening. You know what I mean? It's just very good.
It's telling a new kind of story for Star Wars that we've not seen before. And Connor, you mentioned the line, the line he gives to the woman. That's basically what transitions into the next part where we're introduced to Ki-Adi, who is supposed to be the main character.
We get a very brief shot of Aura Singh on her
yes, as well,
speeder bike, and then cuts, establishing her connection, and then we cut to the Jedi Temple.
We'll talk about it more later, but this run, or this set of issues specifically, does a lot of work to kind of set up, okay, this is an evil person. And not so much this scene, this kind of just scene explains that she's a part of the story, but later on, we'll get to a lot of scenes where it's like, okay, yes, we get it, but she's supposed to be evil. She's supposed to be a bit crazy. But yeah, moving on to the council chamber.
Yeah, we get a very exposition-heavy moment.
Yes. But it's necessary. But yeah, and I want to say this. I meant to say this earlier, but it kind of got sidelined, and that's fine. I've made a video about all this. I obviously really adore this story and its place. It's the way it's trickle-like effect throughout the rest of the EU. But I don't have rose-colored glasses on the flaws. This is definitely something that my appreciation for it is made whole by its connection to everything else, and looking at it in retrospect. But yeah, there are bits here that are very. This isn't even like a particularly bad moment, but we'll get to them. There are moments where it's like, oh my god,
oh, can you maybe not explain what's happening in front of our faces? Most of them are attached to recaps and establishments, so I can kind of understand the vein of why it happened, but that doesn't change the fact that they are flaws. So it's good that you mentioned that, because this is, as you said, Evan, this is a very exposition dumpy scene.
Yes,
but we do get a nice introduction to Eeth Koth, though. I believe is this the first time we see him in the universe?
I would imagine.
Well,
so.
He was in. I mean, obviously
he's in the
movie,
film.
But
of course, but I mean,
his first being speaking
on the
role.
Screen.
The first time he's actually featured and has a chance to talk about who he is.
Yeah. So we're introduced to the legend of Sharad Het, whom the council believes was the Tusken leading the massacre from the footage that they're examining, which then cuts to Eeth Koth explaining that he was actually Sharad's master.
Yeah, and I like what we get for this. I like the establishment. We get a bit more later on for focusing on Sharad, but I like the idea that this person was someone who was a big deal in the universe, and that we're attached to this master as well. Because Eeth Koth doesn't get a lot of material covering him, but the material we do get for him, I always appreciated the character. I could do with a Eeth Koth story. He seems very humble. He seems kind of like the. If Obi-Wan's the quintessential exceptional Jedi, I feel like Eeth Koth is like the perfect example of a character that is just the average expectation of a Jedi is to be.
Standard Jedi.
Yeah, it's that standard great Jedi.
But done well.
Yeah.
Living up to the standard of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Yes. It's actually stated in it's either the encyclopedia or the Power of the Jedi source book that Eeth Koth is more famous within the ranks of the Jedi for training Sharad Het than for his own deeds. So that says a lot there.
And I like that he's very humble about that as well. You know, it comes on later in the story, but his relationship, his relationship with his Padawan, which is part of why he's sending Ki-Adi here and not himself, even though he did volunteer. You know, the council said maybe not. I like that his, you know, that humility and that you've got this personal relationship which sells the kind of philosophy and the character that's been portrayed in Sharad so much more effectively. Because if Evekov had been a standoffish, you know, basic, emotionless Jedi, then the whole idea of how Sharad developed himself wouldn't make sense. So they've done a really good job of setting up that kind of master-student lineage. That master-student lineage that we get so often in these stories. It was a good job here, and in a very short space of time as well.
Yeah. In that, with what you just mentioned, we get kind of like the crux of this entire mission because, you know, for one thing, they're sending Jedi to look for Sharad due to the Sith returning. You know, we need every able lightsaber we can. And also, the reason they're sending Ki-Adi is he's the only one on the council who did not know Sharad personally. And Yoda's like, yeah, if you need to do what might need to be done, you know, you're the best person we could rely on.
You're the only one who doesn't have any baggage with them. You're the only one that we can trust absolutely to, you know, do it without hesitation or regret.
Yeah, because we need 2 story arcs ago, we saw him being named to the council, you know?
Yeah, we need somebody powerful enough, you know, to deal with it, which means one of us has to go. And we also need somebody who can be objective, and that's you. You're in the best position to do that. I like also the fact, and there's also the chance you mentioned that they want every able-bodied Jedi to return because of the Return of the Sith, of course, but they also are watching this person lead a war or like lead an attack on the. Maybe this guy has gone to the dark side and gone completely off the rails. You know, what's going on here? And they're not actually sure that it's him because they recognize the weapon, which is another thing. His weapon is that famous that they can, you know, recognize. I don't imagine that's the case that every Jedi can recognize a lightsaber and know who it belonged to.
Absolutely.
It says a lot. It says a lot when your saber is that recognizable.
Particularly when Ki-Adi, who didn't have a personal relationship with the man, himself recognized it. You know, I don't think anybody wouldn't recognize that. Look, it's you know, it's Sharad Hetz. So it makes a good point of focusing on that. And yeah, I like that that you know that idea. You know, that the lightsaber is so attached to a kind of a person's perception of a Jedi that it's something they focus on. It's very cool for me.
I really like the artwork here. You know, aside from Yoda, Yoda looks not.
Yeah, Yoda
really
looks
like
a bit weird. Yeah,
a little
I thought
funky,
that as well.
Yeah.
Almost more like
Yaddles
in some ways.
Yeah, they're kind of going for that like Phantom Menace thing, like with the old school puppet, because obviously the CG remodel didn't exist back then, but it didn't really transfer all that smoothly to comic form.
The color schemes, though, are really cool. Like that sort of monochromatic scheme that they have between like the blues and yellows, and like the way that they've shaded the faces. And I particularly like it's a simple thing, but it's that silhouette of Ki-Adi when he's thinking about the emotional baggage he has with regard to like the Hutts. It shows him in profile, and it's just like his silhouette, but like the whiskers, like on his beard and everything, and how they catch the light. It's very well done art, and it's not the same art all the way through these arcs, but the writing or the penciling team changes like from issue to issue basically. But I'm surprised by how 4 or 5 different combinations of artists, they all kind of look sort of the same. Not the same level of detail, but the same style.
They strike
the
right
all
kind
being
of
drawn
tone
at the same time.
Yeah, they're still
it's
to
the point where you can move between issues without it being jarring.
Yeah.
Which is the important part. You know, the styles can change in comic runs like this, especially when they're so long as they are, across entire generations. But yeah, the fact that they've managed to keep that kind of cohesive tone and that right flavor without just turning one page and suddenly go, oh god, we're looking at cartoon characters now. It's particularly effective. And talking about the art, I love the following scene with the rooftop of the temple. That kind of mood setting from like the lighting and the way the art has been. Again, it's not the right term, but the camera placement of the shot. You know how they're choosing to frame.
They use a lot of like the wide angles to show like just the enormity of Coruscant during the night hours, and then since it is with all the all the lights on and everything, it creates a very interesting, almost ominous effect.
It almost catches it captures the feeling of like a quiet moment outside on Coruscant, which shouldn't be a thing, but it works here somehow. Yeah.
And I don't want to focus on this because this is one of my favorite scenes in the series, and I don't mean to make light of it, but the idea that he's trying to sneak away in the night and not be seen, you're not using your personal stuff, but a Corellian transport ship just drops down on top of the temple. Those things are not small, guys. Was it just the engines are blaring? Like, is anyone not?
Ki-Adi's not known for his forethought.
Yeah, or subtlety. Yeah. But yeah,
or his knowledge of machines, vehicles.
But just because it was humorous to me because of the way the scene is framed as that kind of noir style, midnight backdrop, Twilight era kind of thing, and then with the Dark Woman herself, of course, coming out of the shadows to speak to him, and then suddenly this giant transport just descends. So it was just amusing. But one of my favorite scenes in the arc, actually, because of my enjoyment of the character Anya Kuro, I like the way she kind of materializes, and not literally because she can do that in other issues, but just appears on the page and kind of talks with him. What's your mission and be careful and that kind of stuff. Good framing of what we get with Aura Singh later. Clearly, kind of laying the groundwork for the arc that those two are going to be going on in later runs.
It's also, again, that sort of the way that this ties into other stuff moving forward. This is clearly not a scene she would have had with Aura, like coming to check on her. Like she would have done like the opposite and been too negligent. This is her. You can see that she regrets later on, like how she handled it. This doesn't explain that up front. But it tracks with what we get later on. It shows like the beauty of like continuity and writers paying attention to what's going on, like with the various characters, and making all that fly.
Absolutely,
so, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It's just a nice example of her kind of, again, retroactively from what we know later, not here, but she's learned she's kind of quote unquote learned her lesson. Not that she should ever necessarily frame it that way.
And I like it for that reason, because again, I would imagine that this is sort of an awkward scene back in 1999. If you don't know who Anya Kiro is, looking back at this, like, who's this Dark Woman person who wasn't in the movies that, like, trained Kia? It's sort of odd from that perspective. I imagine that kind of turned people off, like, who is this person? And we also keep using the name Anya Kiro. She's not named for a while, not until...
quite a long time, until the Clone Wars.
Like during the mission to Deveron. That's when we learn her name. Yeah.
Because Ki-Adi himself calls her first teacher, being the one who brought him to the temple. So yeah, it's nice. I like that relationship as well. It's again not dived into, especially not here, but the kind of she's proud of him. She feels like he was a success story in her history, which is not the case for every one of her pupils by a long shot.
No.
So and again, she didn't have to worry too much about him because he wasn't a problem student as well. But I like the kind of she's kind of reaching out to him because of that reason. She's slightly more of a step apart from him than her other students. So again, all retroactive, but I can just appreciate the subtleties going on in this scene, and the ones that aren't, like giant ship.
Another bit of that subtlety that I would like to highlight is where Anya Kuro points out that Ki-Adi really doesn't like the planet Coruscant, and Ki-Adi kind of outlines his feelings, quoting from the comic. I will tell you this, every time I come to Coruscant and walk within its halls of living metal and breathing glass, my spirit mourns like an imprisoned child. Will my green Saria someday be like Coruscant? And it really makes the point about what Coruscant is and what it represents, and the Republic as a whole. What it is really depends on the perspective you're viewing it from. Some people are going to view this as an achievement, a grand, glorious monument. Look at what we've built. But other people are like, what is that? It's a growth. It's unnatural. It shouldn't exist.
And just the dialogue itself, the prose of it, that is a very beautiful line from a character that's not known for his kind of... subtle perspective on things.
Poetic nature.
Yeah, poetic nature is a much better way of putting it. Yeah, that could be a quote from Star Wars, and it's not one that's ever going to really be drawn on very often by nature of who's saying it, if nothing else. But
I like it. Yeah, I like it because it's not heavy-handed as well. Like it's not like, well, I'm a Syrian or a Syrian, and we all think this way, which they do. They tend to, but it comes off more like a personal preference for like lush green, like paradise, and yeah. It's sort of like that idea, oh yeah, it's a great city. I'd like to visit there. Don't want to live there. You know what I mean? Like that feeling of it. You're fine with its existence, but you don't want it brought to your home.
Yeah, it's framed as that quiet reflection as well, which so perfectly matches the kind of mood of this scene. So they're taking great care to kind of balance, again, aside from that ship thing, balance the idea of what they're trying to put on page right now, with both characters, the dialogue, the art, everything. Very, very effective, and that's why it's one of my favorite scenes of the run.
Mm-hmm. It's especially interesting when you consider that this scene is literally coming right after his interaction with Master Yoda, who was his other teacher. And you could it's interesting because he actually takes a very different tone, you could tell in the way he composes himself when talking to both of his teachers.
Yeah, he has a lot of respect.
Not saying one is
Kuro.
better than the other, of course. It's just you could kind of see it in his head, like I view this person this way, I view this person this way. I think that's very nice.
Yeah,
like what I
true.
notice is that he does have a very open, honest relationship with both of them, but with Yoda, he finds Yoda's tendency to speak in riddles a little bit irritating and prefers to straight talk.
He straight up calls him
with,
on that, yeah.
Yeah, whereas with Anya Kuro, he's a lot more willing to confide in her emotionally.
It's something that's very rare when attached to her, because not many people look to her and go, yeah, I feel an emotional, respectful connection with you. It's always like, okay, yeah, I admire what you represent, but
yeah,
this is not...
She doesn't normally allow it, and she seems to.
She cuts it off.
It's like he's not her only successful student. You can make the argument that Aura is her only prominent failure, actually.
Yeah, completely agree.
So it's not like she doesn't like any of her other students, but she does have a more personal one here with Ki-Adi.
I think I can understand why she would think that her failure with Aura defines her career despite her other successes, because the failure of Aura had such a negative effect for so many people, because Aura Singh, it wasn't like just Xanatos, who fucked off, became an independent businessman and caused trouble, but never really became a major issue, whereas Aura Singh is a very prominent Jedi hunter. It's like before the Clone Wars started, she was probably regarded as one of the biggest threats to the Jedi Order, because as we find out later in the hunt for Aura Singh, she's really good at her job, and she's terrifying.
And it was Anya who made it that way
Which,
to an extent.
Yeah,
and it's fair to place blame for Aura on Anya, like as she does herself. You know, it's like it's just it's that idea, like, is your entire career marked by failure, or is it just one big one? And in her case, it's just like one big one.
Yeah.
And speaking of Aura, our next we're segue into her on Tatooine, and like Callan mentioned earlier, very much establishing her evil points.
Yes. Yeah.
She's literally burning down a restaurant while forcing a Trandoshan to hit himself in the head with a frying pan, who she then decides to just beat up with her fists when he calls her a Jedi.
And get the guy to make her a steak.
All while the place is burning down around her.
Yeah, and by the way, while this is still happening, make me a steak. You know, it's like, come on, we get it. She's not a nice person. It's kind of beating us over the head with that, literally.
This is actually more subtle to me than I seem to recall in the Legacy books. She doesn't eat steak; she drinks the blood off of the steak. You're like she's like a vampire or something like that. Like she orders raw steak and just chews the blood out and gets rid of the meat. So that's a little bit more corny.
Yeah, she's not very tasteful as a character in any of her kind of appearances.
Which she's not really meant to be. That's kind of the point.
Yeah, what she really focuses on, well, obviously as an antagonist, and like, you know, the most dangerous one that we meet in a combative sense, like in throughout this entire arc. But she's also a sort of narrator almost, of like not so much, the events of what's going on to a degree, but she really is the one explaining what Tatooine is. Like, why is it like this? Why do people come here? Why am I here? And it's sort of I don't want to say she really breaks the fourth wall, but it's on that line.
It can be read that way. Because there are moments even in this comic where she's like straight up looking at the camera, so to speak. So you can sort of interpret it as either she's breaking the fourth wall, or it's kind of a form of damaged psychosis where she's sort of kind of talking to herself and trying to maybe, you know, justify what she's doing and plan things out. So you could take it a lot of different ways, especially when you consider the nature of her psyche and how it's explored later down the line.
It does ride the line between the two concepts, you know, of her instability as a person and just straight up breaking the fourth wall for the sake of kind of, as Matt said, narration. The reason I like
nice that they never really go one way or the other. It's like it's very much left up to the reader to interpret, which, you know, for some people can make the comic more enjoyable.
For that, and the fact that her story does continue. She's one of those characters that goes straight through to the very end of the franchise's kind of canonical timeline. So then some. The fact that it carries on for so long, you don't want to kind of have her go through her arc so immediately, and you want to kind of carry it off. Not that was obviously the intention as they were writing it at this point, because they didn't know what they wanted to do with it from the start of this. But it leaves things open for them to use and utilize later on.
So as she's watching the spaceport through her binoculars, she sees Ki-Adi arrive, and he meets up with one of Jabba's Rhodian sort of lackeys. There you go. Thanks, Connor. And we get the pivotal moment of him buying a hat in order to well, because it's established that there aren't very many Sarians on this planet, so in order to keep himself from sticking out, he decides to get a...
And just, avoid
what I'm
insult.
thinking happened.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking happened, because remember it came up where you like complimented his hat last time, Evan, and I was like, well, looks a little bit like a condom, doesn't it? Like I feel like somebody probably said give him a different hat, like in behind the scenes, like he has to have a different hat, give him a samurai hat, and so that's why this is Of
course, the funny thing is that Ki-Adi switching over to this hat, it's like it also makes a lot of sense to me just from a desert survival perspective because. It's like having an exposed head in that kind of beating sunlight is straight up dangerous, and he's got a big fucking head. So having a big hat for just to protect his head.
Yeah, with the wide rim to provide shade as well. It functionally makes sense as well as being kind of samurai levels of cool. But yeah.
But in this sequence, we're also introduced to the fact that Aura recognizes Ki-Adi in a somewhat personal manner, which kind of sets up some stuff that comes up later. But it's a nice little foreshadowing of what's to come.
Yeah, again, it's tying those little strings together for the future stories that will involve this kind of lineage of Padawan and Master. So the things that we can
there's a lot of crossing lineages in these first few arcs.
It makes the kind of different characters and their otherwise completely independent kind of story attachments make much more sense because you've got them to know them on a personal level and you know that they are all interconnected beyond just the plot they're attached to. So I like that.
Right.
Well, it's more cohesive this way. They were definitely planning on him being the star until, no.
Yeah.
we have other characters.
Which, is somewhat disappointing if you really, are a Ki-Adi fan.
To an extent.
I don't mind them pivoting away from him.
I'm not complaining, of course. It depends. It's like, from a certain point of view, it depends on how you look at it, I suppose.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we would have wanted them to just carry on with his stuff as well as introduce the new things. Like when they bring Voss and Ayla and make them the stars of the show, we didn't have to cut off Ki-Adi's run. That could have been a separate thing. But for what it is, it's very good and very effective.
Yeah. We're brought to Jabba's palace, and Jabba's demeanor is lovely as ever.
Yes.
Yeah,
I like stroke this slave's head as I talked about how I'm not evil.
I like that Ki-Adi doesn't kiss his ass here. I like how he is pretty forthright with I hate you, but I'm here to do a job. It's like I really like that because I hate how I don't think that Jabba should be seen as like this political entity that we have to like dance around or walk on eggshells around like in certain other works. I like the calling out of like what he is because he is a horrible person. You know what I mean? It's like if you have to understand just like the ramifications of Jabba's actions and how long he's been around and just how vile he is. Like the whole vile gangster thing or whatever. It applies. It very much applies to Jabba.
And I like as well.
It's also nice when Ki-Adi acknowledges that I could speak Huttese, but the thought sickens me.
That's the reason. That's the thing I was going to focus on. He doesn't actually speak Huttese in that one. He speaks basic because he doesn't have the brackets around it. It's signifying the change. It's the ultimate insult.
Dumbledore thing. Like he
more
calls him
disrespect.
Tom.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Precisely.
Like, I'm not going to let you dictate the terms of this meeting.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that I really enjoy is that Jabba takes that and rolls with it. It's like if he was there are so many people where if they took that kind of attitude with him, he'd have them dumped in the Rancor pit immediately because fuck you. But he also knows better than to try antagonizing a Jedi because, well, sure, he can't use any mind tricks on him, but he could still use that lightsaber to wreck shit. So
yeah, well, he even acknowledged it. That's something he openly acknowledges. I don't mess with you. You don't mess with me. Everyone's happy.
And it's also talking about that power balance between the Order and the criminal underclass as well. Like that, they don't want to kind of shake things up too much on either side. And
the other thing is just the fact that when Jabba says, "This Jedi has spirit. I appreciate a creature who speaks his mind." I think that in this case, Jabba was being quite honest because it's it's
kind of a callback to Return of the Jedi when Rey takes out that detonator.
With Jabba, you're not having to so much walk on eggshells, but you are having to tread a very fine line between making an impression and showing that you're capable versus overstepping and actually offending him. And it's so bloody tricky because Hutts.
Right.
Absolutely. But he gives them the aid that he was promising, the skiff, the team to get him to where he needs to go, and then it goes about as much as you'd expect, or what as you'd expect.
They purposely steer him into a sandstorm in order to, when they kill him, to hide the body easier, and we get our first big action scene.
Which is actually
which is very nice because the actual artwork and the quote-unquote choreography of this one was very engaging for me, given the fact that it's just, of course, Jedi v Thugs. Who's going to win this, I wonder? I liked how much they played into the kind of character side of it. Ki-Adi kind of not taking any shit from them, but at the same time offering, a chance for surrender and giving them that mercy.
Although there is
nice
a very, very
on
noticeable art shift between his clothes between issues.
Yeah, because
like it's not a subtle thing at all. Like he's literally wearing something almost completely different.
I forgot to mention actually. I've got to mention
4 different teams of artists. This would have been the lead into the next issue. So yeah, it's very drastic.
Which is a shame because I forgot to mention earlier, but I absolutely adored the character design, the costume work they did with him in the original issues. That outfit for me, I was like, oh, that's so cool. That really fits his kind of Sarian physique and just accents the idea that he's a Jedi, but also is a practical, person going on a mission. I love that. Really good work.
It's like just talking about Jedi clothing overall for a second here. I've always disagreed with the idea of the Obi Kenobi robes being made into the Jedi uniform. Like, I agree that the Jedi would probably maintain a consistent color scheme of like browns and tans, but it should be every Jedi just wears whatever they consider to be appropriate given their missions and their role. Like, come on, you don't think that a Jedi would wear the equivalent of a business suit to a major negotiation? Are they just going to show up in their freaking ragged, battered Jedi robes that have gone on too many missions, or are they going to dress for the occasion?
Well, in that context, I would go with the Jedi, like, quote-unquote, uniform, the robes and the ceremonial outside of things, because they're standing out as who they are, Jedi in that moment. But by and large, the actual run of comics and games and books and stuff, they do keep... they do, switch their attire to whatever is necessary for the mission. They kind of do have that option. Ki-Adi here, obviously, isn't wearing Jedi robes, and I know it's before the films had probably established that as a 100% norm, but there are other issues where that's not the case. And there's definitely a certain amount of costume work going into each of the characters. They all have their own little styles, even if they're only simple changes. So, but yeah, just something I wanted to note because it was really effective for me here. I know it's not a major part of the book or comics.
Going into the fight scene itself, where Ki-Adi tussles with the thugs. Obviously, the thugs are completely overmatched because he's a Jedi Council master and they're thugs. But the funny thing is that it seems to me that even though the thugs think that the deck has been stacked in their favor and Jabba told them as much, Jabba knows full well that his thugs are probably going to die and that he's never going to see them again. But given that he's trying to take out a Jedi Master and make it look like an accident, he's fine with that. He had these guys steer a skiff into a fucking sandstorm. Like, he probably, like, the fact that the thugs think that they're going to come out of this alive even if they win is pretty funny.
It kind of proves the reason for their expendability as well.
Yeah. Star Wars, yeah. It gives Jabba, good points that he thought that out. He'll let the desert kill him, not the thugs.
And hide the body as well.
And it's worth noting that Ki-Adi probably would have died, like, if he didn't meet Sharad Het. He as we see, like he runs into issues out here. So it's not. I think it's largely based on that injury of his. But yeah, he probably wouldn't have. Jabba probably would have succeeded in that regard had Ki-Adi not succeeded in his mission of finding Sharad Het.
What I find truly comical is Aura's appearance there. When the effect the sandstorm has on her, which she just seemed to get. We get that scene where someone's looking at a mound of sand and she just erupts out of it. Like, really? That happened? Did Aura Singh make that mistake? I know it kind of plays lip service to why it happened, and she's distracted and all that jazz. But it just did seem a bit odd to me because it didn't serve the story as well. She could have just come in any other way and gone. We could have cut straight to her searching for him when he's hiding amongst the Banthas post healing scene.
Well,
before that happens, we do.
She got caught up in the storm, right?
Yeah. Well, because it was seeing Ki-Adi off balanced her.
Yeah. I also think that makes a point about her character in that Aura Singh is reckless, like in the extreme, because the whole impression I get from her, especially the scenes, is that she is very much a chaotic evil who's just about indulging her own sadistic tendencies. And the impression I have of her is that she's actually not very afraid of death. And if she was ever got in over her head and was stuck in a situation where her death was guaranteed, she'd just shrug her shoulders and try and take as many people with her as she could.
All the way this comic ends kind of establish the fact that has to be the case unless she's really a nut.
Well, that's a consistent thing. No, she's trying to take people down to her level consistently. It doesn't matter if she dies in the process. So yeah,
for sure.
So anyway, we get him dealing with the thugs, and then we get him emerging from the sand, interacting with the Banthas, and then we get the healing scene.
Yes, yeah, one of the first, or one of the certainly in this era, one of the most remarkable healing moments of the series, showing the kind of power,
these are
even
all,
though it doesn't completely.
To my mind, these are pretty much his most impressive displays of force ability, anyway.
Agreed.
And they come in pretty quick succession.
Mm.
Yeah,
but the main,
but given the it is still impressive given the advanced nature of force healing overall.
Yeah, it's like
not everyone can do it.
His freaking collarbone is sticking out of his shoulder. It's like, this is a pretty gruesome injury. And one thing I love about the artwork is that it does an amazing job of conveying just how much pain he's in healing it, because, well, that's the thing. He's essentially having to force the bone back into place so that his flesh can heal around it, and he can't even mend the bone because he's not that good at force heal. He's not like full-on regenerative healing. He's still like accelerated healing.
And where is he? He's sat in a heap of sand. It's coarse, it's rough, and it gets everywhere. So the wound is going to be just seeped with horrible gritty grains, which does make it any easier. The next thing of substance to talk about, of course, is when he arrives at the crate dragon den.
Yeah, well, first he encounters some very, very large rats.
Yeah, which is to me like, okay, that's lazy writing. You couldn't think of a different species on this extremely hostile planet. You're just gonna make large rats be a thing.
Well, the funny thing is that womp rats are another confirmed life form on Tatooine, and they're not much more than 2 meters, but a 2-meter rat. Are you fucking shitting me? A 2-meter fucking rat.
Yeah, not fun. But yeah, the real thing to focus on is the crate den, which is a bit more.
Comes across the crate den, and then that's where he runs into Sharad Het for the first time.
Yeah,
we get a brief little action scene where he.
And is dealing. This is the reason why I think he would have died if Sharad hadn't been here.
I would actually agree with that because he's injured. He's already injured.
He's injured, he's weak, he's dehydrated. All of these factors add up. And he's in unfamiliar territory facing a creature he's never met. Certainly nothing similar to this before. It works on multiple levels.
At first, Sharad's reluctant to join in, but then as soon as he mentions that Eth Koth was the one who, sent him on the mission, that's when they quite literally jump into action.
Despite the fact this is also his initiation anyway, isn't it? Like he wasn't willing to. He was going to hold off on the whole initiation ritual if this was a Jedi that needed to be dealt with, independently. And then when he thought, "Oh, that's not an issue. Okay, we can go ahead." I like how it kind of brought that in. And as Matt's probably about to say, the actual way he reacts to that news, I really like the kind of simplicity of it for his character. It strikes the kind of perspective of Sharad that I think really rings true with everything else we know about him.
His reverence for his former master.
Yeah,
which comes up again during the next flashback sequence.
Yeah,
the one thing I do enjoy though is that the comic panel of the Hets jumping into action against the crate, it could very easily be interpreted as the Hets attacking Ki-Adi-Mundi. And the fact that Sharad Het is yelling out the last line of the Jedi Code, "There is no death, there is only the Force." Again, it kind of plays into the mystique of who and what this guy is and what he's all about, because he just said Eth Koth sent you. It's like it could very easily be that's what compels him into action to aid Ki-Adi, or it could have been that's what provoked him to attack him. And the suggestion, it's also like this is one of the suggestions that adhering to the Jedi Code and Jedi ideology is no guarantee that you'll be a good person, because there are such a thing as radicalized Jedi. Like Count Dooku's whole motivation for being involved in the Clone Wars was impose peace and justice through fascism. Like that's not a Sith ideal. That's like Jedi ideals taken to an unhealthy extreme. And this is like one of the first hints of that idea of radicalized Jediism being so dangerous.
Well, not only that, we even have a precedence. Oh, sorry.
In what way would you say? I didn't actually connect the dots there. Those were two separate points for me.
Okay, well, I was just kind of using Dooku as an example of a radicalized Jedi. It's like just the suggestion that the Hets, it's like the reason why they're evil and involved in the Tuskens, like potentially, is because of radicalization. Just the fact that they're fanatics and to the point where it's like other Jedi just don't even matter because all that matters is the Force. And the problem is that if you have that mentality as a Darksider,
And the main
okay,
Probably
so
spin it.
I get what you're
Yeah.
saying.
yeah, and the main point
Yeah,
is that we at this stage we just don't know. You know, the comic makes a point of kind of dragging out the question of what Sharad and his son are about for the longest possible amount of time. And notably for me, it doesn't overstay its welcome. You know, we get the clarity, we get the answer to that question of who he's supposed to be and how he's supposed to think at just the right time before it starts getting, okay, you know, can you please just give us some more information on him? I like how, and it's all framed within both the plot and his relationships with his master and his interactions with Ki-Adi. It's nicely framed for me to fully appreciate.
Mm-hmm. So we get Asherad killing the crate in a rather brutal fashion, using a Gadurfi and a lit torch into his head. It's like, oh, okay, getting serious here. And then he sort of, we get the little initiation of him taking the pearl from the dragon's womb, I guess you could say.
Yeah, no, it's a nice kind of. Well, I mean, it's not nice, of course. It's brutal and disgusting, but I like the.
But it's Tuskens. That's what.
Precisely. I like how fitting it feels, and yeah, it works for me as a nice initiation.
I also like the one panel at the end where Ki-Adi is like noticeably a little bit like put off by the whole thing. You know,
this is where he's
like questioning
that kind of...
like what is because Syrian culture and Tusken culture are like.
Very, very different. But ironically, I do like how this storyline overall kind of makes a point about the commonalities between Jedi philosophy and Tusken culture and how they're not completely irreconcilable, because Tusken culture is still very much about the collective welfare of your tribe, self-sacrifice, and an emotional detachment. The problem is that they got all of it attached to heaping loads of brutality and death because, well, it kind of harkens back to Lawrence of Arabia, if you'll excuse the pretentious hoity-toity references. It's like one of the things I enjoyed about how the Arab tribes were portrayed in that movie, like I know it's accurate to history, is the fact that because they're living in such a harsh desert climate, they can't afford to be sentimental because the terrain they're living in is practically out to get them. If a member of your tribe falls behind, well, you have to leave him behind because we can't compromise the entire tribe to rescue this one guy. We just have to soak up the loss and keep going.
And that's kind of
we do get little snippets of that in the following sequence where we again have a very dialogue heavy segment between Ki-Adi and Asherad.
It's time
Sharad.
for dialogue heavy. We just had action.
Yeah.
So, like lots of action.
No, it's not out of place or anything. It's just that's what we're shifting to. We get his little bit of history, and it's the first introduction to the fact that he is his son, Asherad, which is again it's something like that.
This issue is it's important to note that this arc is in no way about Asherad. You know what I mean? It's like he's just sort of he's the character that becomes interesting and engaging and all that going forward. But it's not about him. It is much more about the father, and sort of like Asherad being like that legacy, pretty much the only one he has left. Because that's sort of a theme of Sharad's character, is that so much has been taken from him, as we see.
And these next scenes and this kind of sequence of moments in this part of the run. It's kind of establishing both the similarities, as Connor said, between Tusken and Jedi philosophy, but also the differences and how the kind of line of conflict between Ki-Adi and Sharad in this moment is kind of being darted across left and right. This is where the tension comes, and through that tension we get an exploration of Tusken culture, which I think is ultimately fitting because so much of what makes them is born from conflict. The struggle against the desert, the struggle against the idea of the raiding parties and that kind of history they have. Just
the struggle of existence.
Where they live, it so nicely pairs both in similarities but also in contrast with the Jedi philosophy. And that needs to be the case because otherwise we can't buy Sharad as a character because it makes no sense otherwise. There has to be at least through a certain lens some form of cohesiveness. Otherwise, why is he doing what he's doing? Why should we care what he's doing? Why he's doing what he's doing? It's very nicely done.
To me, it's like I don't want to be too lenient with the Tuskens. Part of their cultural practices are very just like barbaric.
Oh yeah,
absolutely, like completely inexcusable. But this shows to me like why the Jedi, why I like them when they're portrayed this way, like when they have a connection to something else or when they care about something other than council mandated. Just council mandate basically. This shows what happens when you take someone with Jedi ideals and introduce it to like a very barbaric, primitive culture that has all the potential in the world to be better than it is. And this is like that done right for me. It ends up, ending sadly, but it didn't have to. That's because of outside intervention. That's because of the Hutts.
Right. He's trying to introduce some Jedi structure and focus to a very, as you said, barbaric sort of culture, to a sense of
it's important. It's important to me to make note of that, because this is the only story where like I can even come close to tolerating the actions of the Tuskens that I'm aware of.
Absolutely. And I like how here in the story his father represents the not quite balance, but the kind of controlled contention between the two ideals, or the two ideas rather, the kind of philosophies that he has on both sides. He respects and honors his Jedi heritage, but he doesn't, or his traditions, but he doesn't hold to them over all else. He does consider himself a Tusken. And while I fundamentally disagree with that idea on a personal level, I can completely understand it on a narrative and character-based level, because it's so perfectly framed in both the narrative and the themes that are being portrayed throughout this kind of run of issues. And it helps as well.
Hang on.
Sorry,
hang on. Can you define what you disagreed with? Because I didn't quite follow
Just
that.
Personally,
you disagree with what?
The ideas of the Tusken kind of culture. I would never be a part of that kind of mentality. Nothing against the writing at all. That's what I'm saying. That's the strong part of it. The fact that I can even slightly, get where he's coming from here. And the reason I think that works is because he's so effectively told as. He comes across as very moderate. He's not someone who's ever falling into the idea of the barbarism of the Tuskens. He's very much trying to, as you said, curtail that and push it towards a brighter future while holding on to their own culture. He's not discarding things; he's just refining them.
Yeah. Despite the way he's introduced to the clans, which is basically they took him as a slave and like he just rose through the ranks. He clearly doesn't condone that. Like when he returns the baby, it's like, no, you're not having that baby. We don't need that baby. Like he's like, okay, you did that to me, but I'll be like the last one. I'm showing you guys a better way.
Yeah.
And I get the impression, because of this place in the timeline, that had he lived, had Aura and the Hutts not come and fucked everything up, Shmi wouldn't have been taken. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because it's established actually in the Kenobi novel that his tribe actually had connections to the one that kidnapped Shmi.
Yep. And the other thing is that it really outlines the fact that, like, both the similarities between Sherrod Hett and Darth Krayt, but also the stark differences. Darth Krayt basically lowered the Jedi to the Tuskens' level, whereas Sherrod Hett is trying to raise the Tuskens to the Jedi's level. It's still a work in progress. He's not close to done, and the fact that his work is ultimately aborted by what happens is so tragic, but the fact that he's trying really says something, whereas Krayt gave up.
And moving into what's kind of portrayed in the comic itself for a moment, the actual kind of...
We get a very brutal sequence where he hands a Tusken who lost his arm a knife to, commit suicide.
Yeah, the kind of showing of the cultural side, but also what comes after that, the delving into of Sharad's history. I like how he's coming from a very personal level. Everything about his philosophy is a personal, almost a familial, connection. Well, it definitely is that. He finds solace in his family past and his family's future, where other Jedi would be one step apart. And I like that that's presented through, going back to Heathcoff, the idea that his master was very much on board with that, saying, take this time, go with your family, and granted that ended tragically, but had it not, he would have been perfectly happy with his home planet for a while. Almost like the Syrian Ki-Adi parallel, and when he goes back to his home for very different reasons, but he still goes back and kind of submerges himself in those green fields and that family. I like that. That's kind of what's being delivered, and it's not trying to wax philosophical. This comic, it's talking about a very personal, very character based motivation. Which just fits really effectively for me.
I think it does wax philosophical. It's just it succeeds in standing instead of falling on its face, where that can happen. Like, I mean, when you have like Aura talking about like her perspective about like what these people are like and just how harsh the environment is. I mean, you have like quotes like, "To achieve any hope for survival in such a harsh, brutal place, one needs to become just as harsh and brutal." That seems to be like true, or it's a truism rather that people have accepted. And Sherrod Hett is the kind of person trying to change that, and was gaining in ground. That's what makes it a tragedy.
The right way, or a better way at the very least. And that's the other part. That's the other thing that I like, where it frames
this. We're getting full into the history segment at this point.
Yeah.
I feel like we were jumping around.
Yeah, but the split points it's all kind of one sequence where it's going over the culture of Tuskens, the two different flashbacks we get with him. Sorry, Matt, you go.
Go ahead. No, it's not important to go in sequence to me here. It's just the big ideas. I mean, this is like the last character bit we get. We're like, after this, it's just action. So anything anybody wants to talk about in terms of character development, please go ahead. Yeah. Don't worry about the order.
The other thing I like about this part is when it brings the attention to what he's trying to do on a physical level. You know, Ki-Adi's like, you know, how can you claim to hold to the ideas of the ideals of the Jedi when you're attacking these settlements, attacking these towns. And he talks about, this is when kind of the idea of him specifically curtailing the Tusken approaches. He's like, yes, I'm leading these people, and yes, it's unfortunate, and I'm leading them as a war leader. But what I'm not doing, and what I refuse to allow, is I will not let this turn into a rampage. You know, it gives you that idea of that physical aspect of control he has over the clans. I'm kind of like a Mance Rayder sort of thing from Game of Thrones. It's very much like that unification thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's also
a better story than that, because that one he didn't really go anywhere.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
The other thing is it kind of makes a point about without Sherrod Het, the Tuskens would have done far more horrific atrocities. The death toll would have been much higher, but ultimately their ultimate chance for victory would have been so much smaller because they wouldn't have had the same level of order and organization. They wouldn't have been successful in their raids. It would have been like Lord Odeon's battles, where battles would turn into a meat grinder, horrible casualties on both sides, and as a result, the Tuskens would burn themselves out. Whereas Sherrod Het is like, no, let's be a little bit more precise and controlled in how we do this. Let's hold back on the worst aspects of the brutality and show some restraint, because it's not just not what we do to them, it's how many of us are still standing when the fight is over. You know, let's fight intelligently, not savagely.
Which in itself is a really big part of the aforementioned Kenobi novel with the remaining Tuskens and Plug-Eye.
And I like that that kind of comes up as well, Connor, because we get the actual visual scene of the funeral pyres. You know, Sherrod takes Ki-Adi to the place and shows them, how many the people have lost. And it gives both sides of the argument. And I'm completely on board with Matt. There's no excusing the Tusken way of life. You know, it's not by any means. Well, even just practical.
Well, what I mean
right.
to say
but
is he gives them hope for being excusable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is like, he says this is like one of many burial sites, okay? And like a cycle ago, 100 of them didn't exist. That's how many have been killed in such a short amount of time. So yes, it's the violence to a degree is justified. They're fighting back. What he's saying is don't let it cross into vengeance. Justice, but not vengeance. You know what I mean? Self-defense, rather. And that's the Jedi ideal. That is completely absent from Tusken culture.
Absolutely.
Speaking of like a Jedi philosophy, it's also, Eth Koth's origins are finally revealed in this segment as well. His recruitment into the Order at a later age stemmed from the fact that he lived basically like an animal in the slums of Nar Shaddaa until he was 4, with the Jedi being his saviors. Which is part of
something about that number 4 as well. Is kind of like everybody's like recruited at 4 years old here, like Ki-Adi, Eth Koth. But it
probably has something to do. Just again, not really relevant, but just probably has something to do with the fact that the human kind of stage of moving from toddler to young child is kind of 4. So writers probably go, when's old enough for them to have had some tragic backstory, but still young enough to join the Jedi? Let's have it be that. Even though he's not human, of course. But that's probably where it stems from. That trend rather.
But I like that they kind of use that as like an anchor for his willingness to be more open with Sherrod and the relationship with his family, because it's very much something that he wanted and was denied for several years until the Jedi became his family.
It also kind of makes
Sorry, Connor, you go.
It also kind of becomes a make or break moment for so many Jedi, because there are a lot of Jedi who join because of tragic backstories. It's like, are they able to get over their tragic backstories and instead have their motivation be never let this happen to anyone ever again? Or does it turn into, I want the power of the Jedi so I can turn around and brutalize the people who brutalized me?
And the parallel between the Master and Padawan as well, both works narratively, of course, but also it allows the two to connect on a more personal level, and it helps. It doesn't actively point this out in the comic, but it allows you to model in the back of your head. It kind of explains why these were not a massive exception, but at least a partial exception to the rule of personal, emotional connection between Master and Padawan. That they knew where one another were coming from, and they had a immense amount of respect for that. So it's a nice choice for these two on a writer's level.
It also kind of showcases that, I mean, it was more prominent in these early days, but it's like there's not really a strict, like Jedi aren't like forbidden for, to make contact with their family after their training is complete.
It's always framed that it's discouraged.
It's discouraged, but it's not like outright forbidden,
Well, unfortunately, a lot of them do treat it that way, but
Right,
it's sort of like a unspoken rule or whatever. But yeah,
well, because like a reason a lot of them don't is because they have no memory or emotional attachments because they were taken so young. That's kind of Obi-Wan's big thing that he kind of mentions.
It kind of varies from writer to writer as well as with characters.
Yeah, that too. They were still kind of finding their feet with this one in these early. Sorry, go ahead, Connor.
And just going back to my point earlier about make or break moments, it's like it seems to me that a lot of Jedi kind of view meeting your birth family as a bit of a break, as a potential break moment, because they're all thinking, well, what if you end up developing actual emotional feelings for your family that you never had before, and now you got split allegiances? Whereas it seems to me that a lot of the Jedi who meet their families and make it work are the ones who realize that this is what I'm fighting for. Like the direct connection to the normal life that they don't have as a Jedi. It's like they're able to see this is what normal people live like, this is what their lives are like, and this is what I'm defending. And I'm just now able to put a face to that with my family. Whereas a lot of other Jedi are all thinking, yeah, but what if you start caring more about that normal life than your duty as a Jedi? And what if one day you just tender your resignation because you don't care anymore?
We have him at the funeral pyre, and he sort of explains his main reasoning, and that cuts to the final sort of talking segment just before the big battle where Ki-Adi kind of drops the bombshell on Sharad that the Sith have returned and that Qui-Gon is dead.
Yeah, and I like the note that he knew Qui-Gon. He calls him the old rascal. I wonder why they sent you instead of him. Which is like a little bit of a mild insult. But Qui-Gon's better. He has nothing to do. Like, why didn't they send him?
Yeah. But I like the term as an old rascal. It's such a fitting term for Qui-Gon, especially from the for the lens of Sharad. It's like, oh yeah, that old rascal. I like it.
I think Sharad and Qui-Gon would have liked each other.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense to me. Yeah.
But I think it's probably for that reason that they probably wouldn't have set Qui-Gon even if he were still alive.
I think there was a lot of talking about, Christ, your master's, he's such a stern, like, stick up his head with Dooku,
Oh, man.
And the council certainly don't want to be sending the Maverick out to solve this particular problem, do they?
Certainly not that he's dead, but yeah.
Well, yeah.
Qui-Gon would have encouraged this, I think, in a way,
For sure.
But yeah, it's, I really just like that idea again of like finding something to fight for or needing it, like just being told to do something is not good enough. And he couldn't find like his place in the order prior to this because he was gaining in power and was uncomfortable with it. And at the same time, he's firmly comfortable in this seat of power, like within the Tusken camp, because it's a limited sense of power. He says he's a war leader, but not a king. It's like, I don't wield like absolute authority here. I'm just here to guide them through like the dark night, basically. And like that's what and I care about them. I have a son here. It's my family. I can live as a Jedi, but I need this small scale to operate on.
Yeah. But the very kind of definition of the culture that he will always face defiance from them, whereas with the Jedi, increasingly he was facing, almost adoration. Oh, it shows adoration from the Jedi. So it's like
almost adoration, like straight up adoration.
I'm not comfortable with this. And he was with the Jedi to a point, but then gradually fell off the bandwagon for very personal reasons. And even though and the thing I love the most of all is that he struggled with that. He didn't just go, well, I'm disillusioned. Bye. He stood at it for a long time. And it just didn't work, and that's fine. And and he goes off and finds his personal resolution with the blessing of his master, and that's how it's evolved. It's very, very well told.
It's notable that he never actually resigned. It was intended as a leave of absence. He's still a Jedi in his own mind. He's not one of those people that's like saber rattling against the stupid council and the foolish Jedi ways. He's not like that at all.
Yeah, he's
a Jedi.
This isn't for me anymore. This is something I have to step away from for my own personal reasons. And thank you for understanding that, Master. I love the way it's told and how that's framed.
It's also the point that, like, going back to what you were saying about the differences in his position of power and how he was he had adulations within the Jedi Order, whereas as a Tusken, he's always facing defiance. It's like, it's a difference. It kind of calls to mind the difference in the type of power you wield. And ironically enough, it's like as a Jedi, he was being handed power freely by all of these starry-eyed Jedi who thought that he was the greatest thing ever, and being able to just live life on easy street because of that. And that was what turned him away, because that was where the seductive temptation of power lay. The idea of just being able to have everything he wants right at his fingertips. Whereas as a Tusken Raider, ironically enough, he's exercising power like a Sith Lord. Like I mentioned in our Vow of Justice thing, where you're becoming this big, imposing figure, exerting your influence on creatures outside of you and trying to force them into line. But ironically, it's like the struggle of doing that was what kind of kept him in a good headspace and kept him clean and focused, because the realization that he's just trying to show these people a better way. They're not submitting to him.
Yeah. He's what I like about it is that he isn't what's the word? He's aware of his own fallibility. I was going to say infallibility, but that's the opposite of what I'm saying. This is the kind of person that, had he stayed with the Jedi and like lived up to the point of the Clone Wars and like having all that success go to his head, he could have very easily been another and probably more competent Sora Bulk. You know, like, and he was like, I'm too open to failure. Agreed. And he took the preemptive steps to like distance himself from that well in advance. That shows an immense amount of foresight. He wasn't actually like on the line. He was like, okay, I can see the line, and I'm not going there. That's what I really like about him.
He's very cognizant not only of his own flaws, like you say, or weaknesses, but of the very specific temptations that were occurring around him. You know, he could sense not even the dark side, because obviously the Jedi adoring him weren't in any way coming from that direction, but just the way that seductive pull can lead you, and regardless of whether or not he would personally falter under that temptation, he felt that it wasn't worth the risk, and that was like
the reason for that, by the way, is not like out of fear for himself. He, like Sora Bulk, was hugely respected. Yeah. His fall would have been the fall of many. Yeah, like guaranteed. You know,
it was a very it wasn't just selfish; it was selfless, but also it was paired with his already present concern of. Or growing concern at any rate of his own kind of disillusionment, like wrong word, but he was losing touch with his roots, which he valued personally, and he wanted to avoid that. So it was there was a twin reason for why he did what he did, and the way they kind of blended together and told through the lens of the story was so powerfully effective. Because Sharad Het is not a massively present character. You know, this is the beginning and end of his story. This is everything there is with him. Yeah. You're not counting, the history of him with his son. How he kind of carries a torch for that character, but. The fact that we can talk to such lengths about him and the kind of layered depth to his philosophy, his personality, all of that jazz, it speaks to the power and effectiveness of the story. I love it, and he's not even a character I particularly care about. He's just the quality of the storytelling here helps raise him up to that level on a personal touch. Mm-hmm. But yeah, with that said, I think we can jump into the climax of the story now, right?
Big battle time.
Yeah. Yeah. Now. So what's most interesting to me here is the reasons for it that were given, like the chain of events that were given for like the reason why this is happening. I find that very interesting and frankly unexpected for like what we're looking at here. Just like this limited 6-issue story. There's a lot of thought went into this. Like this is more interesting to me than certain Dark Lords of the Sith I could name, where it's just like, I'm evil and I'm here to fight because I'm evil. This is... I hesitate to use the word human because, this is Star Wars, but just that the power of greed, and that's really all that's driving like the bus here for like the Hutts. And there's such like an impersonal threat in a way, but at the same time, because we've been observing like from the bottom, like, sort of viewpoint, that scope, and seeing what they've done to these people that live at the bottom, whether it's the Tuskens themselves, that Corellian couple, the Jedi involved, that ripple effect they have on all these lives. And it's just so they can live larger than they already do. And I really like that. That to me is like a scary thought, because that's real. Where like Sith codes or whatever, and like magical lightning, that's not. This is very personal, scary sort of like possibility.
It's a very believable story because we know this kind of thing has happened. The whole kind of stimulus for this conflict in the setting at this point, this localized issue on Tatooine, is Jabba's like, I need to get rid of some old weapons. Like, how am I going to do that? I know. I'll spike the demand by instigating a Tusken crisis, and that's literally the reason. It doesn't need to be complicated, doesn't need to be convoluted, but it's enough thought went into it where you can think, okay, yeah, that's a very real threat.
Well, the fact that it's really done to curry the favor of the rest of the Hutts in power.
Yeah,
it's
on
like they have a
level,
problem, and
well,
I've got a solution for it. And because I'm scratching your back, you scratch mine, and support me in my bid for this gem of a world. And Gardulla's like, I built this place, I want it back. And so it's like, and you can't really like root for either because they're both assholes.
Yeah.
But you can respect Jabba's genius, and also you can understand why Gardulla wants what she wants. So I really like that as well, and root for neither because it's such a petty, just greed-driven thing, and they're both already massively wealthy.
Yeah, it's just a mob war.
Yeah, they could have easily just taken this on the chin and gone, okay, made a little bit of loss, whatever, and no one else would have been affected by it. They would have had a tiny dip in profits, and life would have gone on, but they can't because they're so intrinsically.
This is what happens when like
Hutts
have
don't
a
take any little dip in profit lightly. Yeah,
precisely.
It also makes a point to me about how the Republic Golden Age wasn't really a golden age at all, and how their demilitarization after the wars with Lord Khan and the Brotherhood of Darkness was ultimately a bad thing, because sure, there were no major large-scale galactic wars, but the impression I have is that there were probably hundreds of local brushfire conflicts exactly like this going on throughout that entire time period, and the Republic couldn't do anything about them because they didn't have the military forces to intervene, and most of the time they just didn't even know. And it's like, how many problems could have been solved if the Republic asserted its authority more actively instead of demilitarizing to make everyone happy? It kind of kissed the asses of its member worlds instead of, doing its job and keeping order, and this is the result.
All laying the groundwork for the movement to the Empire as well. So
I agree in a broad sense. It wouldn't have fixed this because Tatooine is very
Tatooine is way out there. The Republic just wouldn't care either way. But the point is that there are a lot of other conflicts that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I agree in a broad sense. It wouldn't have fixed this conflict, of course, because Tatooine's not part of the Republic, but demilitarization was certainly just added all that fuel to the fire for what ends up happening with that war.
It gave a lot of opportunity for chaos to flourish.
Yes.
In the inner core.
As we see in the Republic run, this comic run establishes in many different occasions just how badly things went because they didn't have access to this kind of exertion of their authority, or just chose not to take it if they did have it available. So yeah, but the kind of the spark of the conflict goes off, and we get the beginning of the battle. One moment I know it's a bit
Tusken army versus
Tusken army v the gangsters set up the conflict. Yeah, of course. And we get the introduction as well of the idea that Opera Rancissus was the mastermind, or one of the masterminds of the Order, and how he's another character that touched Sharad's history, because Sharad was using a tactic that they kind of worked on together, which I like.
That's something that I actually appreciated more because that's what I wanted. They should have spent more time on Anakin Skywalker's training and showing that he became so good by studying under so many different people that were the best in their field. And you can see just from the subtext here that's kind of the life that Sharad had. It's he may have been mentored by Ithkoth primarily, but he was friends with, he clearly knew Qui-Gon. He worked on missions. It says first mission with Opera Rancissus. That means they had many or several at the very least. So I mean, it's who is one of the head tacticians of the Order. So I mean, it's he's floated around that's what I think. That I really wish that had been established for Anakin so much.
The idea of him as the Jedi hero, even outside of that, that specific situation, everyone's perception of him in the Order. He was one of the rising star heroes of the Order. He was very much the Anakin Skywalker story, but cut off before things went wrong from his own personal foresight, as we said before. So I like that kind of that comes up, because learning from multiple masters is always better from a single one. It just always is, even if they're not split evenly. At least have certain influences from other people. Another point in the battle, again, not really relevant to the overall story, but I want to get it out of the way before we skirt over it. I found the interaction with Gardulla really, really funny with her underlings, when she swats the guy off and he crawls back up and just grabs the blaster and shoots him off again. That moment for me was oh, that's so perfectly Hutt.
And it's also like all he did was he committed the crime of trying to bring like a dose of perspective here. Like that's all he was trying to do, was like try to bring her back down to reality. She's like, nope, I'm on a high right now. You get out of my face. And again, like she's there surveying this battle, having snacks. Yeah, it just shows like the blasé like nature of this. To these are to me like the most sort of despicable sort of people that you can come up with. In many ways, again, like just worse and more frightening than the Sith.
Absolutely, because the Sith have that driving idea behind them. The Hutts are just happy to just rest on their greed. That's literally all they do. They just rest on greed. And yeah, it's not pleasant to look at.
We do almost see her get her comeuppance, but unfortunately Jabba arrives with his own militia to save her and ultimately overwhelm the tribe.
I like that because that means that as hard fought as this was, they were winning before that second army showed up. Yeah. It's like they were that was going to end in their favor. He arrives late to the battle, like scrambles to like turn the tide. Almost like he acts as like a spearhead. He makes it to like her skiff and was on the verge of taking her out. But yeah, it's too bad because a whole second army shows up to fuck everything up.
There's a lot of fine balancing going on in this part of the story, not just on the action level, but the ideas and the presence of different antagonists and different protagonists and stuff. With the possible exception of Ki-Adi having kind of fallen off the page with this one, with the exception of that, everything is finely balanced and held and controlled, and the conflict doesn't escalate or just fall flat. We still care enough about each individual element here, and the overall kind of narrative they're trying to sell functions. It doesn't get distracted by anything. It's not individual parts. It's one greater whole. So I like that kind of it managed to carry the momentum of the previous issues and parts of the story, which, as we said before, Prelude to Rebellion just didn't do. It kind of it trailed off in that one. So this was a nice ending to the story. Yeah.
This has stakes where Prelude to Rebellion, I maintain, just it felt like a story that didn't have a lot of just menace behind it. Yeah, there was some bad things going on, but I don't know how invested you could get. I'm invested in this,
Definitely.
I want to mention about this battle is the presentation of Aurra Sing specifically in the fight. One thing I really love is that they present her as extremely capable, but not invincible. She's not overpowered. It's like there is a scene where she gets swarmed by a bunch of Tusken Raiders. She does take hits. She gets cracked in the jaw with a gappy stick. She is bleeding her own blood at the end of this day.
What I like about that moment as well is there's a trick that was used in one of the panels in the artwork that I wish more people would do. They sort of show like her outline to show where she had been, where like they would have caved in her skull like a minute before to sort of like show that she dodged the motion at the last possible minute. And I like that just because of how just the attention to detail. And you can see that's not like an idiot just like hitting the ground way far away. She had been there seconds before. That's like an underutilized skill for me. I mean, in terms of artwork.
Agreed.
But I kind of want to talk about the duel. Does anybody have anything else to say about the actual battle before we move on from that?
I think we've talked about the main beats.
Okay.
So yeah, going to the duel between.
Okay, well, that's not actually what I was going to get at, but we can cover that first. No, go ahead. Like, let's get that out of the way. That's fine.
Okay, they have their little duel, the kind of the confrontation. It's got a surprising amount.
It starts out with him getting clipped by her sniper.
Yes, yeah, which immediately gives the believability of him.
More devastating to me is like the head blow that he takes, like from falling off this skiff and like landing on his head. He's not. I like how they give a reason for him to, because I imagine, and I'm making like a short hit versus video that people will be like, where is it? Especially now, like we're talking about this. It's coming. I'm slow. You guys should know that. Anyway, I view him as like pretty up there. Like there's obviously like a certain tier within the council that I don't think he would reach, but he's a very capable Jedi, and I like how I can totally buy that he's at a disadvantage here against this opponent, who is skilled herself, don't get me wrong. But it's not, he didn't come into this fresh. He's quite injured here.
Yeah,
and
even with that, he puts up at a very, very, good fight. In fact, she kind of only ends up winning through underhanded tactics when she, clubs him with those rocks with the Force.
Look what else!
That opening to stab him in the chest.
Because he's not quite aware of who she is at this point. So
it's a legitimate enough means to victory, but it's not necessarily an opening I think she would have had if he'd been fighting at full strength, if you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's nicely framed. The other thing as well is there's a significant amount of emotional kind of weight here as well, despite the fact that these two have nothing to do with one another, and he's not really didn't even know she was a part of this situation until now. It's effectively an antagonist coming completely out of left field, but you buy her as a threat and his reading her as a threat because of the way the art's done, the framing of the fight, the escalation of its physical strain being shown. It was very effectively done, and didn't detract from the fact that she really didn't have any place being a part of his story. I liked how effective that was.
Also, red saber on red saber fight. Very rare.
Yeah. Yes, also, that's very true.
Well, what you were saying about Aura not really having any place in these storylines, it kind of makes a point about who and what Aura herself truly is. It's like, as a Darksider, she's basically an embodiment of chaos. She's a walking monkey wrench here to fuck things up. It's like she's not supposed to be a part of anyone's story, but she shows up anyway and derails things. Like, that's almost what her purpose in life is to propagate chaos and derail things. In fact, the fact that she practically orchestrated this battle by telling both Gardula and Jabba to show up at the same time is a perfect example of that.
Side note, I like the line when she was, I'll admit it, it was me. I found that particularly enjoyable, is the way the pros highlighted that. But yeah, I just want to make it clear, I don't have any issue with her being a part of this story. She functions absolutely fine, and nothing is hindered by her being here. I just mean in terms of the character story being told from Sharad, she has no connection to him personally.
No, she doesn't. Yeah,
there's no relevance to her.
It's not a flaw.
Yeah, not in any way a flaw.
It's just the truth that she has an impersonal enmity with him.
Yeah.
She hates him because he's a Jedi.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even know who the hell she is.
And the fact that doesn't in any way hinder the fight, I think, is significant.
Yeah, it's weird because like we have like all these weird connections that I don't know how much of this could have been intended at the time. But so Sharad has nothing really to do with her. But she's a former student of the Dark Women, as is Ki-Adi, as his son will be. Ashrad will go on to complete his training under the Dark Women. So you have like the seeds for all that confrontation moving forward. So that's where I think she finds herself. She finds her place in these people's story, but it's just not here now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
But
so following the the lethal wound, we get the confrontation between her and Ki-Adi.
This is the worst.
Yeah, this is hilariously bad. It is you.
Yes,
this person I know because you are trained by the woman who is known as the Dark Woman. It's like, what? What are you doing right now?
This is where the comics age kind of shows.
Yeah, no, what I was gonna say actually before, when I alluded to having something to say before we jump back for the fight, was I can forgive the sort of corny moment where he just like busts out his lightsaber before he knows there's a battle going on. Like, I'm staying here. Like when Ki-Adi says, you have to come back to Coruscant. No, my place is here. And he's like, he lights up his sword. That it comes off like I view that mainly as like a hokey moment where he's just like, I belong here. And I'm saber rattling literally, But I think you can construe it as, this is my final answer. I'm not coming. And if you press it, like, we're fighting, like, basically, like, but it's not, it's a go away, but not, it's not like I'm challenging you, but it's no more. I've said my bit. So I can excuse that. I can rationalize why he did that, even though in my head, I think it probably was just a hokey thing. This, though, there's no excusing this.
It's just objectively bad writing in every way.
Yes. It's him narrating in the most, in ridiculous specific terms, like who she is, and it's that it's telling and not showing that they have some kind of connection, which is like, I slightly knew you when you were younger. It's not even like it's you, my former apprentice, or like I have to fight you, like that kind of thing. It's a very loose connection.
It's like, you taught me some tricks with a lightsaber, huh? And like,
yes, I did. And you are a student of the Dark Woman, who is this person that we both know. It's like, what is going on right now? It's such a stark contrast from the quality of the rest of the comic as well. That's why it particularly stands out in that one concentrated burst of frames. It's like, what is happening right now? But we have to point it out because the flaws have to be acknowledged, and that is certainly one of the significant ones.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and then we get that little moment where he kind of tries to dissuade her, saying it's like, you're not completely over the edge yet, but then she kind of rallies on him, is like, oh yes I am, and tries to go for the killing blow, which is then when Asherad jumps in.
And that's a point I like, actually, because it's not immediately apparent that she's in that state of mind, but given the kind of, we mentioned earlier, that kind of conflict where she's switching between fourth wall addressing and just being crazy, that mentality that's being framed for us, it makes sense that someone coming from that kind of headspace would be in that, force, state, being between the light and dark, not quite having fully fallen into the permanent grasps of it. So I like that's brought up here, and it gives us the question of, what's going to happen with her story moving forward? How far can she go before she's truly fallen?
And the thing is, she is right. She is that far gone.
Oh yeah,
you know what I
sure,
mean? Like,
yeah.
as we find out, but it didn't have to be that way. In her case, it's really, she has just no interest in being anything other than what she is. She's not really like self-loathing. You know what I mean? So it's like you don't have that.
She's just
aspect.
resigned.
Yeah. She's damaged, and I have sympathy for her to a degree, but not any hope for her to be more than what she is, and she doesn't have it either.
Agreed.
Which is partly the problem. She's devoid of hope, I would say.
She lacks that Azula scene on the beach where she recognizes her own monstrosity. that's
we see, even without going into that rabbit hole, I still think that even Azula is more doomed than you do.
Yeah, we'll get there on the Avatar series eventually.
Yeah.
Well, in any case, Asherad trying to go at her is halted, and she escapes, and then we get the scene where Sharad finally passes away, and Ki-Adi takes on Asherad as his apprentice, or actually more so, Sharad asks him to finish his training,
which I like because he's kind of got the measure of Ki at this point. He's not obviously certain about him; he's only known him for a day or two, but he's got that kind of sense enough. Yeah, there's enough of a trust where he's like, he's probably going to be all right with you. Will you take him? You know his story. You know where he's coming from. How I've explained what we're about. Please take him.
Yeah, Ki-Adi himself has verbalized that he understands that they weren't evil. So, if nothing else, Shroudhead knows, okay, you at least know my story. You know what happened here, and you understand it. So it's like, my child is not now rudderless. You can help steer that. Even if he doesn't wind up, training under Ki for very long.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's like he's the right one to introduce Ashrad to his future, basically.
And more importantly, to the Order as well. The person who can explain where he's coming from to the Masters that otherwise would be ultimately rejecting. Yeah. But both ways.
We also get the passing on of the lightsaber, which is a nice little callback to the beginning, because it was his lightsaber that really was kind of, anchored us to the connection of who he was at the very beginning of the story. So that's a nice little bit of symbolism there.
It's a rare example of someone wielding two in this era as well. But more important than that basic note is the fact that it's with a reason. These lightsabers have meaning to the character. I created it myself with my father, or this is my father's lightsaber. And that comes up again later in following issues. So this is an important part of his story. And the writers, pay homage to that, I think. But also the final words,
which makes it all the more tragic when you consider what those weapons ultimately ended up doing.
Oh yeah, of course. But the other thing I want to talk about is the sorry, you go on if you want to say more about it.
I just wanted to continue the lightsaber thing. It's one of my favorite things about Darth Krayt is that after his resurrection and he loses one of his Sith lightsabers, he does take up his Jedi lightsaber that he built for himself as a replacement and just gives it a synthetic crystal. But the fact that he's not wielding his father's lightsaber, the weapon that was given to him by his dad, to me says a great deal, because it's essentially the representation of how Asherad Het, now Darth Krayt, truly has divorced himself from everything that his father stood for. He's no longer upholding those ideals, and as such, he's no longer carrying his father's weapon. He's got his own scary Sith lightsaber, that York coral thing in his other hand now.
Yeah, I was going to say that I like how, as much as Ashrad fails, it takes a lot and a long time for that to happen. He is, for a very long time, the model Jedi that his father wanted him to be, and that's what makes it sad.
Living up to the legacy.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, but the other thing I want to say as well is that the lesson he imparts, or the final kind of, he's basically begging him that please understand. Do not use these, in hate. Do not use these in vengeance. Have these be weapons for justice. I like that last kind of desperate reaching out from the father to the son, struggle against your heritage, because the Tusken culture and the Jedi can be blended together, but it's a very dark, dangerous path. And he also knows the kind of things that he's faltered under in the past. The idea that Asherad may walk that same line is very much in his mind, and he's like, please take this. If nothing else, take this final lesson from me. I found that really powerful. And the way it's written as well, it was very nice.
It's I think it's a little bit rushed in the sense that I think if they had like another page or two to work with, it could have been like more of an extended dialogue. But I do like it as is. I just think it could have been a little bit better, and would have if they'd had like another page or two to work with. But you only have so much to work with comics.
Just a page or two where you could actually have Ki-Adi and Asherad talking about what just happened, and basically a nice little cool down from the battle, because it's literally the last page before the last, it's basically the storyline just ends.
Yeah.
It's like
And Asherad hasn't been given that much. We don't really know Asherad or his perspective at this point in the storyline. So just a little bit so you can understand what his. I mean, obviously you can infer, well, my dad just died in front of me. Yeah, I'm mad and I'm sad, but I mean, beyond that, who is this person actually? Everything he's done up to this point has been actioned, pretty much.
And we
shooting
know
somebody, taking out the crate, and so on. Things like that, displaying his powers.
And we know that comes, of course. We get that exploration. It's a very damn good one. But purely in the confines of this specific story, I agree. We definitely should have had a page or two of as Connor said, cool down to kind of explore the a snapshot of what the Ki-Adi Asherad Het relationship was going to be, and how that would be framed from moving forward. I think that would have been a nicer end than just and they walk off into the sunset kind of thing. It would be more effective.
Yeah. And again, I know it's very subtle, but I think it is worth mentioning that Sharad's body does not vanish when he dies, which is something that really, like, the comic writers, especially back then, were still playing a little bit fast and loose with, because if you read a lot of the really old comics that came before this, almost every Jedi Master did disappear when he did die. It was kind of Qui-Gon who kind of set the precedent that no, not all Masters necessarily do that.
Is this the first Jedi to die after Qui-Gon then?
I think so. First Jedi Master. Yeah. So I think that's interesting that they kept that in there, because when you consider just how soon the movie was out, so it's just interesting continuity.
Yeah,
and it's funny because Qui-Gon would be the one Jedi. No, it's fine.
It's okay.
No, it's a good point, because Qui-Gon should be the one Jedi that would fade away. It just isn't. So it's like this never made any sense.
that should just be a part of the Jedi business from the start. That shouldn't have been a secret they needed to rediscover for me. But I agree that following in line with how it is as is, Qui-Gon should be the guy that happens with. And like, what was that? Yeah.
I always felt funny to me, because particularly in the New Jedi Order stuff with Luke's order, like every other Jedi just fades into the Force, and it's like, well, you shouldn't really know how to do that.
Luke rediscovered the secret too.
Oh, for sure. No. But I mean, like, just the middle of the run Jedi, the ones that have fallen have found their way back, they just fade away, and it's like, what? It was really down to a case of the writers not understanding the way it worked, and even the overarching idea in general not really being cohesive. So that was the reason for that. But worth pointing out in Asherad's case, or Sharad's
so they walk. Yeah. So they walk. So he passes, and they walk into the binary sunset.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to give our closing thoughts before we wrap up here.
Love the story. It's so powerfully done. The fact that I have no personal connection to most of the people in this one, with a rare exception, and the fact that I still care about it so much speaks a lot for me. Because if I don't personally jive with the characters, I usually don't enjoy a piece as much. But this one was so carefully crafted and surprisingly good, given the kind of the setup of this, because this is a crisis on Tatooine. How many of those have we seen? And to have it attached to the Tusken Raiders, of course, as well, the culture that not really anyone should like. It speaks towards its prowess in getting across its message, and the fact that it was so perfectly blended with the character of Sharad, who, as a one-off, should not be. He has no right to be this effective. This should not be a character we have any interest in, and yet he's one of the standouts of the entire EU for me.
I would phrase it that way as well. Connor?
I love the fact that this is effectively the moment where the Star Wars Republic series truly found its feet. Like, this is the moment where we got our first glimpse of the greatness that was to come, like the Clone Wars run. Like, this is, like, you guys were talking about how Prelude to Rebellion meandering, and we did discuss Vow of Justice. It was good, but it was a bit of a storyline. This was kind of the moment where Republic kind of announced its presence and declared that it was a thing, and here it was. Like, even though it technically wasn't called Star Wars Republic at the time, it's part of the series run. It's Star Wars Republic. This is the moment where Star Wars Republic stepped up and said, "Hey guys, here I am."
It's very good, but and like you said, it is a setup for a lot of really great stories further down the road. But what I also like about it is the fact that even taken entirely on its own merits, this is still a very engaging story with interesting characters, great action, very dynamic artwork, and very memorable moments. And it really does stand out for that. It makes it. It's very much its nice little slice of just Jedi. Well, what's the word? I was gonna say fun, but it's not a very quote unquote fun story. But
Jedi-dom is the one I always use.
Jedi-dom, thank you. Yeah, it's a nice little slice of Jedi-dom that leads to a lot of very, very great things into the future. And,
one of the other things is the fact that this story is a tragedy, but it's not like a super downer tragedy where you finish it and you've lost all faith in humanity. It does end with that kernel of hope. It's just this is one of those instances where shit hit the wall and everything went bad. But it also makes the point that that doesn't mean that you can't move on from this. That doesn't mean that you can't salvage the situation. It's like Asherad Hett came away alive and he became a great Jedi, even if he did ultimately turn into one of the most horrifying scourges in the whole setting.
It ends in a tragic moment. The story is itself not a tragedy. It doesn't damage the tone in that way, and I think that's the effective part.
And I like I agree with Evan that it does stand on its own as just solidly good anyway, but it gets better when you think about like just how it fits into like the rest of the EU. Whether you're talking about this time in the timeline or just repeating thematic overtones that stretch like from one end of the timeline to the other, and a lot of that just has to do with the history of Tatooine. And I like the effect that Tatooine thematically tends to have on people. It's noted as called a worthless ball of burning dust in this story. That's how it's phrased by Aura during one of her like sort of musings, and I love that. But it tends to be like it's seen as like this sort of gateway between like the core and like the what's the word? Help me out here. I'm losing it. The
Outer Rim.
Outer Rim. Yeah. And it's like they go, if you're going from one to the other, you probably have to pass through Tatooine. But it tends to happen that important characters who come here, they tend to find their destinies as well. Ashrad, he won't really go off the rails into a bad trajectory until he comes back here and faces Obi-Wan. You know what I mean? I love that. Like the Lucas's whole poetry thing doesn't really fly in the movies, but Star Wars, it can work. And like this is an area where it does. And I really just like the impact of Tatooine.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. The kind of the non-acknowledged vergence of the Force that Tatooine kind of represents for the story and the setting. Yeah, I massively appreciate that. But yeah, those are our thoughts on what's this called? Outlander. Outlander and Vale Justice in a smaller scale.
I want to say real quick that we gushed a lot about this because it was good. The next arc that we're going to cover is Emissaries to Malastare, and I at least have some criticism. So if you guys think, just a few.
Things are going to get interesting.
We don't blindly love all this. At least I don't. And so I just want people to understand that we are taking a critical eye to some of this. It's not blind EU love here. There are things to love in Emissaries to Malastare, but for me, they're few and far between.
Completely agree. But we'll discuss that next time when we do cover Emissaries of Malastare. Let us know in the comments down below anything you think we've missed or want to cover in greater detail on this topic, on this issue, or issues. I'm ready for it. I still have an outro.
Yes, he does. That's it. Great Jedi 91. Thanks for watching.
Evan Over 95. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
May the Force serve you well. Good night, YouTube.
Goodbye.